and welcome to Roadside Rumours. I'm Sanika.
And I'm Kawal, and today we're here with...
Hi, I'm Derup.
Hi guys, so we're here to talk about identity and where we belong because I feel like we all come from very diverse backgrounds.
Yeah.
So do you guys want to start by telling us a little bit about yourselves?
So I was born in Hong Kong and raised in Nepal.
Mhm.
Then after that, I went to Singapore, lived there for 4 years.
Yeah.
And also, currently right now, I'm living in Hong Kong.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was born in India and then I moved to Hong Kong, and now I'm studying at university in Hong Kong.
I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and for me, I just go back to India every few years to visit my relatives and my grandparents because from my family, my dad's the only one that came to Hong Kong. I mean, we have like his cousins here, but like from our family, only my dad's the one, like my family's the one that lives in Hong Kong, and my grandparents are back home, so we go back to visit them. Should we start by talking about like the concept of home? Because I feel like with you guys moved a lot, right? And for me, like my roots are from India, but I live in Hong Kong. So I feel like the concept of home must be very different for all of us. So Dhruv, could you start by telling us?
So for me, like I moved in a lot of places. So now it didn't become like like a house, a home. Now it became more like a person, a home. And for me, like a home is like basically where I feel comfortable and where I feel safe. So that's the definition for me home means. Yeah.
I think for me as well, home is more of a concept. It's about where you feel the most comfortable, and I feel like it just depends on how you see the situation in the place. Because sometimes when I go back to India, I feel like that is home as well because I'm so familiar with the culture, the food, the people. And then here as well, when I'm hanging out with my friends, my people from high school, I feel very comfortable. So that is home to me.
That is so interesting because for me, I feel like home is more of a feeling because I was like born and raised in Hong Kong all my life. So growing up, I was always surrounded with locals, and I feel like I was surrounded with locals more than Indian people or like people from like, India. So even when I go back to India, I kind of feel like a tourist over there because I can't even read the signs. If I get the newspaper, I can't even read the newspaper. I mean, now it's in English, but like before when I was young, I used to go back. So I used to feel very distant away from the way I grew up compared to how my cousins back in India are growing up there. So for me, like home is more like a feeling. Like I feel really comfortable in Hong Kong, and I just like the food we eat, when I go to school, my teachers speak in Chinese, or like when I'm reading a book, it's in Chinese. I think it's like, I feel like growing up in Hong Kong, I just feel really comfortable. And if someone asked me do I consider Hong Kong my home, like I would say yes.
So what would you say when someone asks you where you're from?
If someone asked me where I'm from, I would say I'm from Hong Kong. Like, would you guys say the same?
I was because my parents, they told me you say you're from Nepal, but at the same time that's the I always have a question because I move in a lot of places, and then you always ask if I say I'm Nepali, but I don't have that Nepali trait or behavior. So in that topic, I'm always questioning, but when I'm saying to the people, I always say I'm Nepali.
That's interesting because I feel like I would also say I'm from Hong Kong, but you always have to kind of
explain yourself. Yeah,
because people will be like, oh, where are you really from? And especially when you go abroad, I feel like I've noticed it even more because in Hong Kong there is that kind of, but like I said,
they still kind of understand.
Yeah, they still kind of understand because it's not that uncommon, especially when the circles that we hang out in.
Yeah.
But when you go abroad, people will be like, oh wait, you're from Hong Kong, but you don't look like Chinese. And I'm like, yeah, there are other people that live in Hong Kong as well.
Yeah.
It's like for me to same, you need to explain them more. For me to sort of, I just tell them I'm from Nepal. Just to make it easier,
But do you feel like it kind of hinders? Like, do you feel like you have to simplify yourself for other people too? Like, do you know, when you're when you simplify your identity to explain to other people, do you feel like that kind of hinders how you actually feel?
If I have time, I will do it. I will
Write them an essay.
Write them an essay, where I'm from. And stuff like that. How Nepali, how Nepali people came to Hong Kong and how they migrated to Hong Kong. I got time, I will do that. Yeah.
I feel like it's so interesting how we all have so many layers to our identities, and I feel like growing up, our identities were always shifting. We are obviously born in Hong Kong, or we come from India, and then we're women of color, or a male. It's I feel like we have so many layers in this
it's all very complex.
Yeah, and so do you feel like growing up you were ever ashamed of anything related to your identity, or when you're explaining to others? Just now we talked about simplifying it for others, right? So were there any times in your life where you, especially when we're young, where you felt a bit ashamed or embarrassed talking about your own culture?
For me, I never feel embarrassed about like talking about my own culture, but moreover, like I feel like I had struggle with like my appearance, like as a guy, like how I look,
Yeah.
and like in that aspect, like like yeah, I have.
And you told us you went to an Indian high school, right? Where majority of the students were Indian.
And then like
You being the only Nepalese.
I'm the only Nepali, and then the guy like who looks different.
Yeah.
And I found out like appearance also like play a big part of making friends.
But was it easier for you to make friends like later on?
Later on, yeah. And first few week of me studying in
The school?
Singapore, we're surrounded Indian. Like first few week, like I was teased, and then I was like like
The odd one out.
odd one out. I was the odd one out. But later on, like like because I know the language, I know Hindi.
Yeah.
And later on, and at the same time, like we have a common interest, which is the movie.
Mhm.
Later on, with that, like I became friends with them, and they start accepting like
Yeah.
who I was. Yeah.
I think for me as well, it definitely was a problem when I first got here. So obviously I came from India and the culture there was very different. And when I was first introduced to the international school culture, I felt like there is diversity, but it's still not very celebrated. Like there are people from different parts of the world, but you're still kind of looking up to the same culture, which is in my case, it was Western culture because
Right.
most of the other students were from the West and most of our teachers were from the West. So I always felt like I had to suppress the Indian part of my identity, and no one really made fun of me or no one really said anything to me, but it's just subconsciously you just do that because you want to fit in. You
Yeah.
don't want to be the odd one out, especially when
Yeah.
you're in your teen years.
Yeah.
Everyone just kind of wants to do the cool thing, which
Yeah.
is what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
And you don't have the courage most of the times to be like, okay, this is who I am, this is my unique identity.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that because like you went to a school where majority of the people were white, I guess. So for me, I went to a high school where everyone was Chinese, and the year I entered that high school, it was the first year that the school had non-Chinese students come in. So there was me in my class, and there was in the next class there was a Pakistani girl, and there was also a mixed race like girl, and we were all friends, but everyone was like shocked because that was the first time the teachers or the schoolmates had like non-Chinese students in the school, so they had to kind of like adapt to us and we had to like kind of adapt to them. So I feel like everyone was just so conscious, and I feel like that really hinders like when you're building relationships, because in the first few years of my high school I always just felt like I wanted to like fit in, or I just felt like I just like you said, like you just want to suppress your culture because you don't want to like be the extra like odd one or like the special one, like you don't want that attention on you. So I feel like growing up, like I had a very similar experience, and I just remember like like I told you guys like the temple story where like my school was right next to the temple, and when my schoolmates used to ask me like, oh, do you know what that place is, I just didn't want to like, I don't know, I just didn't want to like stand out, so I just used to act like, oh yeah, I also don't know what that place is, but I clearly used to go there every week. So I feel like growing up, it just like really like affects us.
Yeah, it does.
But do you think now you feel closer to your culture? Like, do you feel like you guys have been able to embrace it more? Because I feel that for sure, especially after coming to university, like I said, the bubble bursts, and then you meet all these different people and you realize that it's okay to have all these differences. Because in a high school setting, it's very common for everyone to have that herd mentality and everyone does the same thing. But in university, it's just a much bigger structure, so there will be smaller groups of people, and through that I've been able to find people that also share the same cultural heritage or share very similar experiences, and then that really helps you, I think, flourish and embrace your actual identity. Do you guys feel the same?
Yeah, for me, I feel the same. I feel like I embrace my culture, Nepali culture, and stuff like that. At the same time, like while I was in Singapore for like 4 years, I was distant away from Nepali culture, and because the community over there is not that much.
Yeah.
But once I came to Hong Kong, like the Nepali community there's a lot, and then like still like for me some part of the culture I'm not familiar with, which I would love to like know more about my own culture, and then like just educate myself.
Yeah, I think similar to you guys, like growing up, like I wasn't really that aware, like my mindset was very like narrow, I guess. Like to me, like when I think about India, the only thing I think is like Punjab, like that's the first thing that comes to my mind, because in Hong Kong I'm always surrounded with like locals or like Chinese culture or like Chinese food or Chinese language, but when I go back home I speak Punjabi. So to me it's just these two cultures that like like in my life that are really prominent. But like I think the year I entered university I met like international students who like come from different parts of India. And even last summer I spent like 3 months in India, so I feel like that really gave me a lot of time and space to like explore like my roots, or like get to know like, you know, like my environment and my culture a bit more. And I feel like that made more room for me to be more curious. And yeah, like I just feel more a bit like at least a little bit closer than I was before to my own heritage. Yeah.
And I think the part about feeling like we have to suppress our identities is also to do with like the media, because what we see in the media is so one-dimensional. We only see, especially for me growing up, all my influences were Western influences, like movies from the West, or even YouTube. I think YouTube was a huge part of us growing up, because while we were growing up, it was like a huge thing. And as a 14-year-old, all the YouTubers I was watching were all white males from America, and I guess there were some women. But I remember when Superwoman came out.
Oh my God, yeah.
It was insane, because for the first time we saw someone that
represented us.
And we could relate to that culture of an Indian girl living abroad, and their stories were just so relatable, and that just makes you feel so secure in yourself, because you feel like, oh wait, there's someone else that also relates. Because like you said, you were the only Indian in your school. Even for me, for a long time, I was the only Indian in my school, so you don't even have anyone to share those experiences with. But the minute you start seeing that someone else also has them, it just makes you feel more comfortable.
The media plays a big role, because like while in Singapore, like, you know, people didn't know that much about Nepal. They, through media, like, you know, like in media,
they had these like stereotype,
like, you know, with like time to time, like, you know, I was also make fun of over there. But yeah, media does play a huge role.
I feel like besides media, like, do you feel like our parents play a do you think our parents play a big role in this whole like identity situation as well? Because obviously they're the reason we are born in Hong Kong, right? So, but the way they grew up or were brought up in India or like Nepal is so different from the way we are growing up now. So do you guys ever have like conflicts with your parents, or like arguments regarding this?
Just like a list of conflict. Or they are like, you know, not having a, like, you know, mutual agreement.
I think for me, definitely, because my parents grew up in a very different culture than my own, and it was very difficult for them to accept that I'm growing up in a very different environment. Like little things like coming home late. I think we would always talk about how our parents would always have issues with us staying out for a long time, or even hanging out with people in certain situations, and it's just more common here. But for our parents growing up, that wasn't the case, so it's not easy for them to understand that this is a completely different environment. But I think eventually, as you start to live here and as you start to see the life here is different, you kind of warm up to it. So I think my parents definitely warmed up to it over time. What about you guys?
For me, like, I think my parents, for them also, like, for their background is like they move into a lot of places. Okay, so for my mom, like, she's her father is the Royal Army, so when she was young, like, she did move into a lot of places. He lived in Brunei, also studied over there also. And for my dad, his parents, like him, like move into the northeastern of India, called Nagaland, and like he was born and raised over there. Like 20 years he lived over there, and with that, I think both of them like developed this like adapting skills, like, you know, moving to different country. So like for them, like, you know, moving into like from Singapore to, like, you know, to Hong Kong, I think it wasn't like, at first maybe it may be challenging, but eventually I think they got adapt to the situation. And
I feel like for me it was a bit more harder for my mom, because my dad, at least he was working. So my parents got married really young. They got married when they were 19, and they moved to Hong Kong like the next year, so 20, and they had me when they were 21. So for my dad, at least he was working in Hong Kong, and he was like seeing the outside world, so he kind of like understood. But with my mom, she was a housewife in the beginning, and she used to stay at home, and for her, like, her mindset was still very like conservative and traditional, so, you know, like the way she grew up, so that's how she felt. So growing up, like, she used to like teach me like her ways, like, you know, don't come home too late, or like, you know, the way we dress up, or like, you know, like she just had a very like traditional mindset. But like it, like, obviously when I was young I used to listen to her, but it wasn't until I reached my teenage years, then, you know, when you go through the rebellious teenager phase, so that's when I started questioning her, like, you know, like like I just remember my most like significant memory is like when I was doing my public exams, and I think I went home around like 10:30 or 11. That's like not even that late now that we think about it, right?
It doesn't make sense like when they say like don't stay out that late is
Yeah.
dangerous.
Yeah.
But like it makes sense when you're in the
Like if you think about it from their perspective, it makes sense.
But if you're in Hong Kong, like,
Yeah, it's like
yeah.
So for me, at least, I was just studying. Like I wasn't even doing like drugs or like I wasn't even doing anything bad, you know. So I was just studying. So I remember when she called me, and her first concern was that, oh, what if someone sees you out so late? Like, what are they gonna say?
Yeah.
Like, of course, now that I reflect upon it, I'm like, okay, that makes sense, because growing up, like, you know, girls weren't allowed to be out that late, or like I don't know, like I feel like people in India had a curfew, like they have to be home by a specific time, but in Hong Kong it's so much safer, right? So I just remember when like my mom said this, I was like so offended, then I had to like ask her to come down, and I like remember talking to her and telling her that, like, you know, it was your decision to come to Hong Kong, so you guys chose to come to Hong Kong, like you guys have to kind of like adapt to like this environment. So like now that I reflect back, I feel like it was harder on my parents more than it was on me, because I was always raised, now we were always raised in this environment, so for us this is normal, this is okay, but for them they have to like change suddenly. So I feel like that's kind of like where the identity, like, you know, I feel like that's where there's like a conflict as well, because me and my mom, I just remember telling my mom that it's your fault, like you chose to come to Hong Kong. But I was surprised, because my mom was so understanding. Like I remember her telling me that there's no conclusion to this conversation, because at the end of the day it's just like two generations, like, you know, we just can't, like, you can't compare it that way, like the way she grew up, like no matter how much she tries to change or how much our parents try to change, at the end of the day it's still deep rooted in their head. So, you know, it's hard to change someone's mentality.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is that we're having this conversation about how we felt so different growing up and how that was a problem and we had to suppress it. But now that we're adults, we're in our 20s, we're always encouraged to stand out and be different. And it's like you're always encouraged to find that one unique thing about yourself. So do you guys feel like in this process of finding yourself, you've kind of gone back to your roots?
I kind of feel that way, because growing up, like, I remember my mom and dad used to force me to learn Punjabi, and I was just like, nah, like, no thanks, like, I don't want to go to these classes. Even my siblings were all just like, we were never going to need this in our life, like, why do I need to learn, like, the language? As long as I speak it, I can communicate, it's fine. But the weird thing is, like, now, like, this summer, I have taken up like I've been trying to learn Punjabi myself. I've been like taking like online, like, you know, just doing my own research and like memorizing the alphabets. And I feel like even though like it's not something that I really need in my life, but I would like, I'm interested in it, and I feel like it would, like, for example, a lot of like books are like, you know, like books about my culture are written in my language, or like a lot of poetry, like, you know, I'm an art student, so I want to read like poetry or like letters, and they're all when they're written in my languages, sometimes when you read the translated version it gets lost. So like if I want to read like something art, if I want to read art or like listen to Punjabi music, like I want to learn, like, you know the meaning. So I have surprisingly tried to like go back to my roots and relearn them. What about you guys? Like
for me, as I said, like I did study in Nepal. I did my kindergarten from grade 1 to grade 5. I studied over there. So like no matter what, like, you know, how many places I have moved, like the place you will like, you know, like grow up into, like, in a way, like you will have to, I mean, not have to, like you
will have some sort of attachment to that place.
Some sort of attachment, and then like, and you're now I'm like, you know, like I'm more curious about my own, like, you know, culture, and then Nepali culture,
for sure,
and then like I want to learn more about it also.
I think same goes for me, because now I'm realizing, like, growing up I always felt that my culture wasn't as cool or it wasn't as rich, and I didn't even have any idea about the different things that existed. And my parents did try, like you said, but in that moment it's like you're in your teenage years and you're so rebellious, and you're
just
like,
think it's so uncool.
And you don't want to associate yourself with that. But now that I'm learning little things, like even things like religion and like mythological stories, history, and it's just so interesting, and I just feel like I didn't explore the full potential of that culture, but I'm definitely getting back into it just to see how different things can be, and how it's okay to be different, because the world around us is always going to be different, because we also live in such a globalized world now, and because of that there's no one specific culture that's just pure and in its purest
like
state.
Everything's kind of like intertwined.
Everything's intertwined, and because of that it's okay to learn it in this way, because this society now reflects that as well.
And just respect, like, towards like the differences, like our differences, and
this is what we feel about our own identities, but what about official identities? Like for me, whenever people ask me, like I said, I always say I'm from Hong Kong, but my passport is Indian.
Right.
So officially I am Indian.
Right.
But what about you guys?
That is so funny because recently I was applying for the Hong Kong passport, and on the form they asked us to fill in, like, so basically I had to surrender. So I carry an Indian passport as well, but I'm applying for the Indian passport, right? So we have like two
You mean
process.
you're applying for the Hong Kong passport?
Sorry, yeah, I'm applying for the HKSAR passport, and there's two parts to the process. So the first one is there's naturalization, where you change your nationality, and the second part is when you obtain the passport. So right now, me and my siblings are applying it, and we're surrendering our Indian passport. So on the form, it asks like we are Indian by. So there's a few options. There's birth, descent, registration, and birth. And this was so confusing for us because I didn't know how to fill it in. Like, am I Indian by descent because my parents are from India, or am I Indian by registration because I'm carrying an Indian passport? So when we circled descent, right? Because we thought like our family members are, but we went there and the lady's like, you have to fill in registration. So for me, like, I never, like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm carrying a Hong Kong passport, like I'm carrying a Hong Kong ID card. So I always thought like, officially I'm Indian, but like to me, like my identity is like a Hong Konger. So that's where like I feel like it's so interesting, you know, like I feel like growing up you don't think about these things.
It's confusing also because like for me I was born in Hong Kong, and then like I was born in like around like 1997, so that time it was ruled by British, and then like now I have a British passport, and then so like in that sense, like because I remember when I was young, like when I was a kid, like, you know, like I my parents told me I have a British passport. Then I associate myself with like an Englishman, like and I said like, you know, like and when I was studying in Nepal, like my weakest subject was Nepali. So I was like, you know, because my passport.
I'm an Englishman.
I'm Englishman, so that's why Nepali is weak. That's
it's fine.
That's why it's fine. Like, you know, like I used to like you know, brag about this kind of stuff. But yeah, in this topic is very like confusing and interesting also.
Actually, I want to ask you guys, what do you guys feel about like cultural diversity in Hong Kong? Like, you know, we all claim that Hong Kong is a multicultural city, so we all claim that Hong Kong is a multicultural city. So do you guys agree with this? Like, do you feel like Hong Kong is as accepting of different cultures as it claims? Or because I personally I do a lot of community work, so I get to like see how the locals view this, and how like people like, you know, from our communities view this. But I just want to ask, like, what do you guys think? Like, do you feel like Hong Kong is as diverse as it seems?
It says it's like culture diverse, but also like for me also because in Hong Kong, at first I studied in like private international school, and then like so like so for now, like I start doing more volunteer work, like more like community work. Then I find out about like more about like how the local school, how they function and how they do it, and they say it's diverse, but I don't think it's diverse because like I found out that in local school, like they divided like, you know, like
Chinese and non-Chinese, yeah.
And it's my first time like hearing also like the ethnic minority, like, you know, that
you as well, right?
Yeah, same. And when I came to university, but I think what you're saying is true because it's in Hong Kong. I guess it's diverse because there are people from everywhere, but it's not all blended. Like people don't really get together and just assimilate into
so I feel like people just exist, like different communities.
Because for myself, growing up in an international school, that was one bubble, and then when I came to university, I feel like that bubble was broken, and I was like, this is crazy. Like Hong Kong has like so many different types of people, like you said the word ethnic minority. I had never heard of it before, and then when I at least never thought of myself as an ethnic minority, because it's like you're raised thinking that like you don't like put yourself in a category like that. You know? But then when you hear things like that, or when other people put you in these categories, you're shocked. And even when I think about like my life in Hong Kong, after this, it's if I decide to ever work here, I feel like I will still always be in this bubble of non-locals working in Hong Kong, and probably hang out and like live my life in specific areas, like, you know how areas such as Central are a lot more
diverse.
I don't even think it's diverse. It's this another expat bubble, and then there's other areas that are more local, and I feel like I would never be able to completely assimilate in the local culture, no matter, even if I learn the language. I guess it will help a little bit, but the entire culture as a whole is just so different.
That is so interesting because I just remembered the word ethnic minority being thrown in my face like since like high school. Like in primary school, it was still okay because I went to like a semi-international primary school where we had people from like India and then Pakistan, Nepal. Like it was still like Southeast Asia, but when I entered high school, it was just like it was a local mainstream Chinese school, and I was the only Indian there, right? And this Pakistani girl and this like mixed race girl, and I just remembered the only term I would hear to like associate like us would be like, oh, the EM kids or like the EM students. Like I would just hear this term like every day.
Sorry guys, our camera just cut off, but thank you so much for watching this episode, and we're gonna see you guys with another episode very, very soon.